Hey guys, and welcome to the channel. Today, we're going to be looking at how to paint the Rangers of Gondor models from a Battle for Middle-earth strategy battle game. Now, instead of going into rather in-depth tutorials, today we're going to be looking at 3 easy, simple, and fast beginner methods of getting your Rangers of Gondor painted up quickly. One of the things that I aim to do is provide ways so that you can get your army painted up quickly and effectively and onto the table to fight with as soon as possible. For some of us, we simply don't want to have these amazing, impressive painted armies if it means that we can only get 1 or 2 miniatures done a week or every couple of weeks even. For some of us, we want to be able to crank out these models and get them onto the tabletop fast, but we also want to make them look good. We want to play with models that we're proud of, that we enjoy, that we like, but we don't have, or we would prefer not to put the time investment into them for them to be display level models. So I've chosen 3 separate ways we're going to go about painting these models. The first is we're going to look at contrast paints. This could be speed paints, these can be instant paints. I've gone with the contrast paints because 1, that's what I have, and 2, these are Games Workshop models. So let's use Games Workshop paints, and all we're going to be doing is using contrast paints. The second method is dry brushing. Instead of painting the layers, instead of edge highlighting, doing things like that, we're just simply going to come over them with a base paint, we're going to put a wash on it, and then we're going to dry brush them up. And the third way is pretty much the standard method. Base paint, wash, use a layer to build them up. We're keeping it simple, we're keeping it easy, we're keeping it fast. The goal is let's get good looking miniatures onto the table quickly. Now, one of the things that I'm going to do throughout this video, and I'm going to try to do in more videos, is to provide the Games Workshop, the Citadel paint line equivalent of what paints I'm using. I like to use a lot of different brands. I like to find paints that I like rather than necessarily just sticking with one brand that I like, finding the right shades, the right combinations of things and putting them together. But for a lot of us, we only have a single range. Now, if it turns out that Citadel is not kind of the favored paint range of what we're using, let me know, and then I will try to add in, if it's Vallejo, I can add that as the equivalent. If it's something else, I can add that. But I figure since a lot of what I'm doing is revolving around Games Workshop miniatures, Games Workshop paints are probably going to be pretty popular. The other thing I'm going to point out in this video is when I make certain mistakes. As I watched back through this video, there's certain things that I went, why am I doing that right now? That's not correct. I shouldn't be doing that. Habits that I've built or different things that I just simply wasn't paying attention to help you see things not to do and mistakes that I'm making that hopefully you can actually avoid. I've also specifically chosen 3 separate color schemes to do these in rather than doing them in 3 similar ones. And there's pros and cons to that. The cons are obviously you're not seeing 3 identical paint schemes and what they look like in each of these different methods. But the pros are hopefully that you're seeing some different paint schemes, because if you're like me, you like to see different paint schemes to be inspired, to try something different. You're seeing a wider range of paints and how you might use them. And most importantly, you're not just seeing the same standard thing that's boring. You're getting variety in this, and hopefully that's a good thing.
So with our first method here of doing contrast paints, the goal here is to be quick, but also what you have to realize is when you're working with contrast paints or instant paints from scale 75, maybe you're doing speed paints from Army Paint or whatever it is, you have to be careful that you kind of paint within the lines, because it's not easy to come back later, fix mistakes, and then reapply the contrast paint over it. You can do it, it's just not simple. So one of the things we have to remember when applying the contrast paints is to make sure you thin them down before you put them on. And then once you put them on, you want to move them around in a way that you move towards the recesses, pushing the paint to be darkest where the shadows are going to fall. And that's going to make it look best. When working with lighter colors like Aggaros dunes, you want to make sure that you actually do put it on a little bit thicker than you would your other colors. You might see that you have more color than you actually want. That's fine, just add a little bit of water. Once again, push it into the recesses. But these lighter colors are going to be put on a little bit thicker. The opposite is true of this black Templar, really your super dark paints, is make sure you lighten them up even more than you were your other colors. With all paints, but especially with contrast paints, make sure after you've put them on, you just leave them to dry before coming back with a second coat. A lot of streaking is done because people don't wait for those paints to dry. They come back when they've started to dry and they create waves, they create texture, and they kind of smudge the paint around and ruin a lot of the work they've previously done. This Cygor brown is a pretty intense color, so if you're using it, make sure you thin it down significantly. If it's a little bit brighter, a little bit lighter than you want it to be, just simply come back again and reapply it a second time. But if you put it on as a really thick coat the first time, you're going to lose a lot of contrast within the paint, and it's just going to look really thick, and it won't have a lot of the life that you really want. For the gold here, we've already applied the silver paint in the dark aluminium, and here over the hilt where we want it to be gold, we're just taking Imperial Fist and we're painting it lightly. We're not using a very thick consistency, we're going with a very light paint over top. When using contrast paints and really washes in general to cover these large surface areas, make sure that you apply it, you move the paint in a downward motion, and be careful for pooling. It's one of the things that I should have been more careful on these models, and I wasn't, and you can kind of see in a little bit of the glossy finish that you get in the end here. But kind of come back as the paint's drying and just make sure that you don't have these puddles being created. Our second and third methods are going to look very similar in the first two stages, and really it's the third stage that's going to set them apart. For this one, it starts out very similar with laying down base colors, whereas with the contrast paint, you're laying down essentially all the layers in one go. With this one, you're laying down a base color for each one, and then you're going to shade it, and then you're going to come back and you're going to dry brush in some highlights. Now, the reason that we do this one is that it's just a little bit faster than the standard method you're going to see third. We're covering all of our leather parts with this mahogany color. It's a really rich, brown color. It's kind of got some reddish hues in it that make it stand out a little bit more from your other browns. It's one of my favorite colors for leather in general. It just has a very rich, beautiful color to it. With the difference between this style and our contrast style is you can make mistakes with this and come back over and fix them with the other paints, because this base layer that we're doing is all going to be opaque across the whole model. We're building up over our primer, so you don't really have to worry about, well, if I make a mistake, it's going to screw up the next color, because the next color is going to come on over it, or maybe you've already painted it and you're painting over something you've previously painted. That's fine. Grab your color that you used previously on that part and just reapply it. This green looks extremely bright, extremely vibrant. That's okay. It's not going to have this lime green color when we're done with it. We're going to add a wash to darken it down, and the color that we're coming back in with is a little bit more of a muted green rather than this kind of bright fluorescent looking color. We're putting our Agrax Earthshade pretty much all over this model. The only areas that we're not hitting with our Agrax Earthshade are going to be our green and our skin. Even our blacks on this, we're going to put the Agrax Earthshade over them. It gives it a nice brown tint to it, which kind of pulls it into the rest of the model, makes it all kind of pull together and look similar, and gives it a little bit more of a grungy, earthy black tone rather than a black that would stand out from the rest of the colors that we're using. Using our Nuln Oil to go onto our cloak. The reason we use this and not a green shade is because we want to darken all of the tones here, and we're really just looking to darken the cloak, not really to shift its color into some different greens. You can kind of see a comparison very similar in what these stages were, but honestly, the contrast method is much faster. We have to be really careful on models like this with our dry brushes. We want to make sure that we're working very softly. Make sure that your paint isn't super chalky. One of the tricks to dry brushing is whenever you're wiping the paint off of your brush, use something like a MDF board or something along those lines rather than a paper towel, because the paper towel or kitchen towel is going to soak up all the moisture in your brush. And even though it's a dry brush, what you do want is a little bit of moisture in that paint so it's not chalky. We're being very careful as we dry brush on these details. It's okay if we go a little bit over, but we're working so softly that if the brush hits parts that we don't intend for it to, it really shouldn't matter. It shouldn't show up because we're being so soft that only the areas that we're really looking to hit should be having color coming off on them. This is a really fast way to get highlights without taking the time to individually highlight every single piece and every single part. You don't have as much control in your highlights, but you have a little bit more control than you would with the contrast method. And here we have our final method. If you've been in miniature painting for a little bit longer, before contrast paints came out, this was kind of the tried and true method of how everyone was taught to paint. You lay down a base coat, you lay down a wash, and then you build up some layers onto it. So here we are, we're building up our base coat. Coming back, we're using the same flesh tones for all of these guys. Once again, going with a third different color scheme. Hopefully you find it more interesting to watch 3 separate schemes being painted. But if not, if you would have preferred that they all be painted in similar schemes but with different techniques, let me know in the comments so that maybe whenever we do more videos like this, I can go back and do that if that's what would be most helpful for people to see. With this one, just like the last one, it's okay if we paint over parts that we've already painted or parts that we're going to paint, because once again, we're going for opaque finishes. We can paint over mistakes that we make. It's not like contrast paint where we're laying this down on top of a grayish or whitish surface in order to get the color we want. If you mess up with this black, your next color can come right over top of it and it's not really going to make a difference. One of the major things you're going to see within this paint job that I made as a mistake was the way in which I used my brush strokes. What you see is that as I'm painting, I will use my brush to go in one direction, and then while painting that same area, I go back and move my brush in the opposite direction. Now what this does is it creates weird texture. It doesn't give you a smooth finish. It moves the paint in a back and forth motion, when instead what you want to do is when you're painting a part, keep your brush moving in one direction. Pull the paint down, pull the paint up. Maybe you're pulling it to the side. That's fine, but you want to pull it in one direction and not go back and forth with this motion that you're going to sometimes see me using here. You see there how I started pulling the paint down on the bracer and then I took a separate brush stroke to push the paint up. Now I'm correcting that somewhat by moving the paint down again, but keep your brush strokes all in one motion on one side, and that will give you the smoothest finish when painting. Just like when using washes or when using contrast paints, you want to be careful on large surfaces for pooling. When you're painting your base coats and your layer coats on large surfaces, what you need to do is make sure that you're using thin layers. Don't try to cover it all in one go. Use a thin layer, come over it, cover it a little bit, let it completely dry, wait till all that paint is dried, and then come back with another thin layer, and possibly come back with a third thin layer. If you're finding your paint looks thick, it looks gloopy, it looks like you put it on and it has all this extra paint just sitting there dried on it, and then you look at other people, you go, well, how are they getting such a smooth finish? This is how they're getting a smooth finish. They're using lots of smaller layers. They're taking their time and they're not rushing here. Yes, it's not as fast, but the end product, honestly, it's not that much longer, but the end product is significantly better. When applying this flesh tone, you want to really be careful that you pull it into your recesses. You don't want it sitting on the tops of your nose or the fingers or the knuckles on their hands. You want to make sure you pull it into those recesses in order to give that flesh a realistic look and to create a lot of difference in color between the brighter, higher peaks of your nose or your knuckles and those deeper recesses near the eyes or on the side of the face or in between your fingers. All of our brown colors are being shaded with our Agrax Earthshade. Really good way to get your colors to automatically have shadow, to automatically have depth, and to look a million times better without having to put in a ton of work for it. One of the things that you'll see me do quite often when I work with shades is I will put a lot on in one go, and then I wash my brush off and I come back with a damp brush and I move the shade around to where I actually want it to sit and where I want it to be darkest. For this cloak as well, we're using Nuln Oil again. We don't want to shift in the green color. We simply want to deepen those shadows. We want to darken the color up as a whole rather than shift it into a whole nother shade of green. So now here's what we do is we take our layers and we come over and we carefully pick out the raised edges. For these models, there's a lot of cloth here. There's ridges all along the cloth where it sticks up. There's edges. On this jerkin, you can see that there's stitches down the front of it. It's a little bit harder in maybe the black areas where there's just large surfaces. So where there's large surfaces, you've got to just water your paint down a little bit and kind of come over the tops, the brightest spots of where those surfaces are. When you use washes, that really helps because they oftentimes show you exactly where those highlights should fall. You can see here on these bracers, of course, they don't have any ridges or any edges down the middle of them. So what we do is we pick out the spots where the shade has left as brightest, and then we come over with our layer color and we just boost those highlights a little bit. The opposite is true here, you can see on the leather, where instead I'm focusing simply on where the edges lie, and that's all I'm hitting. I'm not worried about anything else but those very bright edges. When painting faces in a quick manner when you're not taking your time to do them to the best of your abilities. You're just quickly getting them done. Simply focus on the cheeks, focus on the nose, focus on the forehead, and focus on the chin. For him here, the spot that's just simply important is that we focus on the nose. Once again, with these surfaces, we're just looking at where that shade has left it the brightest, where it kind of shines through that base color and you don't see a whole lot of the shade having gathered in the shadows. We're going to boost those up pretty subtly. Here on this skirt, one of the things you'll notice is that it's a rather large surface, so we've got to find ways to highlight it. One of the ways I do that is I take my layer color and I water it down significantly, and then I just kind of come over the raised areas, the highlighted areas, and just bring the color up a little bit. We don't really want it to look like the edges do. We don't want it to be that bright. We just kind of want to break it up and give it a little bit of color. Now on his cloak, just like we did with the leather, all we're looking for is edges. And there's a lot of ridges, there's a lot of edges on this cloak. We're going straight to this color and we're gonna find every one of these edges. We're not gonna worry about any of those big flat areas of the cloak. Now, if we wanted to do a higher level paint job, we would focus on those areas. But for this, for our purpose of making this fast, of getting these guys done and looking good, but also being able to have them ready to be on the tabletop quickly, we're just going to focus on those edges, create a lot of contrast, give us that nice, clean look. Here you can see on the top of the hood, I watered down that green even more, and I just kind of put it on top there to break up that color. The light's going to hit the top of the head the most as if it's a sunny day and really make that look good. And then we're going to come back finally and we're going to make sure that we really fill out those highlights there on the edges all around the cloak in order to give it this nice contrast and make it pop. And there you have it. 3 simple ways you can paint up your Rangers of Gondor for your next gaming session. I hope you guys found this informative. I hope you found it useful. I hope you can use some of these techniques in your models. If you're like me and you don't really like the glossy look of these contrast paints or the washes on top of these, you can just simply take some matte varnish and you can just brush it on them and knock down a lot of that shine.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this. Thank you for putting in that energy. I hope you'll give it a like. I hope if you haven't, that you'll hit that subscribe button. I would greatly appreciate that. If you have some feedback, if you have some thoughts, leave it in the comment section. That would be greatly appreciated. I've got a lot more models on my painting desk right now that I'm working on for a Battle for Middle-earth strategy battle game. But if you have ones that you want to see, please comment them, shoot me a message, let me know. I'd love to paint what you want to see painted. So once again, thank you so much. And until next time, I'll catch you guys later.